All right, in this one, I want to talk about this study where they used glycolic acid. And they essentially tracked collagen production, skin thickness, and also localized inflammation. Glycolic acid, if you don't know, is actually an AHA, an alpha hydroxy acid. And this is one of the acids used in chemical peels, the ones that you do typically once a week. So in this study, they actually used different concentrations and compared them all. The pH was acidic, of course, because it's an acid, and they use it daily for 5 days. The study was ex vivo, not in vivo, and they used skin removed from a brachioplasty, which is basically a surgical operation where you remove extra skin, and they try to replicate the conditions of the human body as much as possible. There are pros and cons to this approach. Of course, in theory, in vivo, it's more accurate, but the study is more expensive. In this one, they literally used surgical waste, so it was way cheaper to actually do. And there are other benefits. For example, it's way easier to isolate variables in this type of study than in an in vivo study, and it's also way easier to measure. So both types of studies have pros and cons. I find this one pretty interesting because, again, they're using surgical waste. They're not really paying people for months to be in the study. It's actually just extra skin from a surgical procedure. So I find that pretty cool. So extra skin, ex vivo study, they isolate the variables, they use glycolic acid, which is one of the main AHAs, alpha hydroxy acids, for 5 days in that skin sample. So here's what they found. And again, I find the results extremely interesting. I like when they have visual representations of the results. Not all studies have that, but essentially there was a really strong correlation, very statistically significant, between, for example, skin thickness and also glycolic acid use, which, as you may have guessed, also translates into higher collagen density. So as you can see from the visuals, which again, they're way easier to track because it's ex vivo instead of in vivo. And as you can tell, the more you increase the dosage, the denser and thicker the skin tends to be. You can see an extremely strong correlation showing that on average, the more you increase the dosage, the better the effect on skin thickness is, which is pretty much showing a cause and effect. Same thing here when it comes to epidermal proliferation. Same thing here when it comes to collagen. And both when you look at the numbers and both when you look at the visuals, we can tell that the skin was essentially thicker and stronger in the after. And in general, the more you increase the dosage of this particular AHA. So then we have TNF-alpha measurements, which is basically a pro-inflammatory cytokine. What TNF-alpha means is tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. So the less you have it, the less inflammation you have on average, and the more you have it, the more inflammation you have. And what they saw was there's pretty much no difference when it comes to inflammation between the groups. If anything, you get a little bit less inflammation after AHA use, even though in this study, they use it for 5 days straight, which is overkill. I mean, personally, if I were to use them, which I'm probably going to start soon, I would use a combination. It would be a chemical peel, and I would use it once a week. I wouldn't be doing what they do. I would rather use things like tretinoin or tazarotene because they're acidic as well, and you don't really want to combine acids on the same day. Although AHAs have their place. Like I said, there's a bunch of chemical peels that have them, and they do increase collagen and elastin, and they can have synergistic effects with other actives that you're using, but probably not a good idea to mix them in the same day. But the difference between pro-inflammatory cytokines, at least when it comes to this particular one, TNF-alpha, was not statistically significant. So the p-value was above 0.05. So basically all the formulations, and this was more true the more you increase the dosage, saw higher collagen levels, higher skin thickness, and pretty much no statistically significant effect on TNF-alpha, which is an inflammation metric. So no increased inflammation, more collagen. Elastin was not tracked in the study, but usually when something increases collagen, it increases elastin as well. But yeah, when it comes to skin rejuvenation and anti-aging, skin quality, whatever you want to call it, the results were actually pretty great. So even if you already use retinoids, using alpha hydroxy acid strategically, they will likely increase skin thickness and collagen, especially since they have different pathways by which they do that. So you're going to have a synergistic effect. So pretty good study. I still don't have it, but I do plan on using chemical peels with alpha hydroxy acids relatively soon. But yeah, I found it pretty interesting, the way that it was conducted. But I know there are in vivo studies on these same compounds, alpha hydroxy acids, and they saw increases in collagen and elastin. So this is not just true for ex vivo studies, it's also true for in vivo studies. And yeah, thanks for watching.